Section 20 of The Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Adam Milligan. The Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1, When Ghosts Walked, by Christopher Bannister. We must die, Walter. There is hope. Not in this world, Walter. I know the danger, Anita, but we haven't been recognized in London. Fanny Leland saw me this morning. She knew me, I'm sure she did, for with my veil and all she acted as if she had seen a ghost. Anita DeMar stretched out her arms as if imploring safety from the skies. But we have been over this all so many, many times, Walter, and it all comes back to the beginning. No one identifies us, but someone will. You can find work, but it all goes black and sordid. George must be here now, and that means prison for you and open disgrace to me. We must end it now, while it is beautiful. But, Anita, and there was some new note of hopefulness in the young fellow's voice that lifted her face from the hands into which she had let it droop despondently. Yes, Walter? There was hope in her voice, too. I met such a fine fellow this morning, an Englishman. He must have seen something in my face, the fate of it all, for he asked me if I needed a friend. He'd help us. Oh, Walter, and you confided in him? You always do, poor dear. You confided in me. Yes, he replied, the color in his cheek proving how shrewd her surmise had been. I told him a little. We exchanged cards. Here, he added, taking one from his case and reading. Sir John Memory. Good name, isn't it? Oh, Walter, Memory. There was the touch of doom in what she said. Dear, we cannot go too quickly. It must be soon. Here, let me have your cards. Why didn't you throw them overboard with the rest? Walter Scarsdale handed her the little leather case with drooping head. There, said the girl, she was nothing more in years, as she dropped it into the lodging's fire, which was the one bright thing in their London that day. There, Walter, it has to be. Your name is on the case. A long, slow silence fell upon them. The end was near at hand. A few hours. Well, they would still be united. It was the inevitably tragic end to a romance that had seemed so simple to the thoughtless, luckless pair in New York, so simple to work out and to live happily ever after. Walter Scarsdale, the son of an old friend, was George DeMar's confidential secretary. Anita DeMar was his wife, and a generation younger in years, but DeMar worshipped her. Yet for this untoward romance he was not blameless. He had married her knowing she did not love him, bringing to bear upon her youth the pressure of needy kinsfolk, the support of an aging father and mother, the education of her younger brothers. She had been driven into it from her very lack of experience. Walter and Anita's passion was a conclusion foregone from the first, an infatuation sent by some divine decree such as the ancients recognized and tenderly commiserated, while the modern world has nothing but scorn and revilings to wait upon detection. She was going to Europe with friends, a great party of them. London, Paris, the Riviera, possibly Egypt. How much better than the keen American winter already begun. But madness was in their blood, the madness the gods send to those whom they would destroy. Scarsdale, laying his plans well, contrived to have his unsuspecting employer and friend send him to England at the same time, investments there demanding the presence of someone on the spot. And at the last minute, the very day the Graustark sailed, they changed every plan, rushed to the steamer at Montreal under an assumed name as man and wife, and cut the world from under their feet. Nor was this all. Their luggage was already aboard the Graustark. Scarsdale, remembering the need for new wardrobes for them both, rushed back to DeMar's office, possessed himself of all the available currency in the vault, and rushed away. Too late he realized that in so doing he had severed the last strand in the web of his former destiny. It was symbolic when, with the solemnity of a rite, the couple crept on deck together their first night out. Oh, what a night it was! All that they had worn from home in a weighted bundle under Mrs. DeMar's newly purchased cloak, and consigned their part to the starlit, austere Atlantic. The hasty belongings they had gathered in the Canadian capital must suffice them until they reached London. London attained, they must suffice them until the end. They arrived in Liverpool happy and unrecognized. There is little travel in mid-December, and no one on the ship suspected more than that they were bride and bridegroom in the splendor of their honeymoon. Their keeping to themselves in such circumstances was entirely natural, quite a matter of course. And they were happy, oh so happy. Even death could not dim that, and it gave them courage to look into each other's eyes and smile now, with death at their elbow. On the train from Liverpool to London came the beginning of the end. The Graustark, great and gallant ship, laden with the happiness of hundreds, sank almost within sight of the Statue of Liberty. An appalling explosion blew the mighty vessel into fragments amidships, and all the hasty succor on the sea, tugs and yachts, harbor boats and torpedo craft, availed only to save a score of lives. An anarchist plot, some powerful explosive in the coal, an infernal machine infernally effective, was the sole conjecture a press, frenzied at the horror of it, could frame. Buying on the dock the papers they had not seen and had not missed on their voyage, Walter and Anita had settled back in the speeding train to connect themselves tardily with the world they had deemed well lost. The first newspaper they opened had their names in the fatal list, Mrs. George Dearkin DeMar, and after a long roll of women both had known, Walter Scarsdale, far down the somber roster of friends and acquaintances. Their dream of future safety vanished in the thought that a respite had been granted them, but what a respite! It was a doom escaped pointing forward to a doom from which there was no escape. They became, on the instant, living ghosts. They followed with staring eyes the multiple disaster down through the week in a diminuendo of accorded space, and on the third day read that George D. DeMar, following his physician's advice, had taken ship for London, seeking distraction through travel from the blow that had almost stricken him down. Heavens! Were ghosts already half disembodied to be followed by such a nemesis as the presence and personality implied? It had been Scarsdale's thought to write from London concerning the money he had taken. That was impossible now without betraying the existence of Anita. Vengeance lay ready to the hand of a husband and friend outraged and betrayed, and the betrayer knew of old that George DeMar could be implacable. The taking of the money was turned into a crime. Recognition in London meant denunciation, extradition, a trial in New York, and the penitentiary. If he had had wit enough to leave an acknowledgment of the amount, all prospect of accord would not have been so completely lost. But disgrace for Anita, prison for himself, he could face neither. They were condemned to die by the very terms of their living and loving. From the first pallid stare into the future on that rushing train, they accepted the skeleton hand that held them in its grasp. At the station in London, they made appeal to a wise old cabman for a shelter. With the worldly knowledge of his kind, he saw in a young woman so simply clad and heavily veiled, and a tall, bearded man with colored spectacles, that concealment of identity, but not of intent, which prompted him to his course. He drove them far from the haunts to which their evident station entitled them, leagues away from the London they and their kind had always known, and left them outlawed from civilization. There, in lodgings as comfortable as contracted space allows, ministered to by an elderly Frenchwoman, who found in their youth and grace and palpable romance momentary forgetfulness of her own exile, they had lived another week of terror and delight, and had already planned their end. In its details they discovered an excitement like that in the self-appalling tales of childhood, or in the stories of mystery Poe drew from his melancholy brain. For their tragic purpose there remained just money enough, in the wildness of their passion that had been too slight a consideration hitherto, for keeping up the comedy of life until the final curtain, but not enough to secure them even another week of delights. Dead to the world already through the Graustark's calamity, aware now of the weight of the world's judgment, they could merely plan to go together, and go gaily, and without it being known. In the searching of hearts and weighing of means that day in the train, Walter and Anita had decided to live the year through no more. No more was possible. Everything they had had of intrinsic value was at the bottom of the ocean, sunk with the Graustark, or tossed overboard by their own hands. Scarsdale had thought to find work, but the fear of being confronted by DeMar, already due in London, tore away that last and feeble resource. Now the last day of sad December was come, glooming with tempest upon the metropolis. It was already cold. The fire was growing dim, burned out by the gusts overhead. Walter rose and mended it. The thought of finality in that simple act made them both turn away and sigh. Their lives would be burned out before the replenished fire went cold at last. Their landlady had asked them, fortunately enough, if they could not wait upon themselves on this, the evening for which they had announced their departure. She explained that the new year had too many memories to permit of her spending it away from her countryfolk, friends, and lovers of La Belle France, stranded like herself, amid gloomy fogs and grimy snows. A little collation stood without, she begged to inform them, as she bade them good luck and wished them a happy new year. Bonne fortune was theirs already, she told herself as she went out into the storm. The fire burned bright again, and in its light Anita DeMar sat sewing, changing with deft fingers the evening wrap and dinner gown bought in Montreal, until their maker could not have identified them. She went painstakingly over every detail of her wardrobe and Walter's, making certain that no mark of the past remained. There was plenty to do, though the details had long been arranged and provided for. A cab was to drive them and their scanty luggage to King's Cross, as if for the night express to Edinburgh. Another cab would carry them to the Hotel de la Pole, in time for supper after they had forwarded their effects to the north. Walter had sought through the pawnshops, their number attesting the poverty of the neighborhood they were sojourning in, until he found 2 derringers, carrying large bullets effective perhaps at short range only, but terrifyingly effective there. Perhaps it was the explosion which sank the Graustark that brought it to his mind, but he had made that morning an excursion to the West End for the first time since his arrival, securing in a gun shop there explosive cartridges large enough to kill an elephant, yet fitting these little engines of destruction perfectly. It was just after their purchase that he was spoken to by Sir John Memory. If his reflection showed in his face, he certainly looked as if he needed a friend. Similarly, Mrs. DeMar had fallen under the observation of Fanny Leland when she went to buy the hair dye that was to change herself and Walter beyond the power of even shattered recognition. This had been the last detail planned, and it might not have been carried out but for the Memory and Leland episodes. Anita, no less than Scarsdale, was determined to spend these final moments in a scene of joy, in a spot the very publicity of which would act as a deterrent to successful inquiry. The pair stood clasped heart to heart before they went to make the changes in their appearance they deemed necessary. The sigh of an hour before became a sob as they parted. When they returned to the little sitting room, the fire had grown dim again. Anita's glorious golden locks were bronzed to the color of an autumn leaf. Walter's beard was gone, and his auburn hair and eyebrows stained dark brown. They laughed at sight of one another, like children preparing for charades. Their work was thorough. They had even spoken of the morgue, where vulgar crowds sought gruesome pastime, and the unhappy fold their lost, hoping as they searched that they would not be found there. Both were in evening dress. Walter's pistols were loaded, and extra cartridges slipped into his waistcoat pocket. All that was required was nerve enough to pull the trigger, once and yet again, and they had thrown themselves upon the mercy of a hereafter, shadowed indeed, but more pitiful than the present, as God must ever be more pitiful than man. The clock struck. It was chilly, but what need now to mend the fire? He counted over their scanty supply of money, finding just enough to pay for the cabs, the tickets to Edinburgh, and a plentiful supper. All was done, and the time was short to wait. They sat, Walter and Anita, glad of the duskiness of the room that they might better remember their real faces. Talk went from them, and they threw themselves into one another's arms with a cry. Never had their love been so beautiful, never life so lovely and so precious. Every caress had in it the vigor of a youth that was never to know decay, the full savor of completeness. They were at once Eros and Psyche, immortally young. Bacchus and Philemon, mated until the end. The clock struck the half-hour. The wheels of the cab arranged for grated on the curb before the door. One last impassioned embrace, in which their hearts almost leapt through their breasts, that they might touch and, the good landlady's collation forgotten, they went hand in hand down the darkened creaking stairs, and forth from the deserted and desolate house into the whistling night. Fate, so cruel to them in the great things, smiled on the small. Everything went as they had planned. Their cab drove them to King's Cross and disappeared. They watched it in the outer darkness. They looked for Edinburgh and saw their luggage duly sent on the fool's errand, to lie unclaimed until it passed to human ownership again through auction. A second cab sped them on to the Hotel de la Pole, quiet, somewhat remote, entirely respectable, solemnly fashionable. They were given a table tete-a-tete in the middle of the farther side of the commodious room. All about them were parties decorously joyful, eating and drinking, waiting for the new year to bring them the opportunity to offer one toast of happiness before the evening closed. There was a hunger in Walter's and Anita's eyes, deeper than any mere appetite for food, the avid desire for life as it would be lived by everyone else in the place, at least safely into the impending year, while the stroke of 12 spelled for them a darkness absolute. They ordered jointly, gaily, extravagantly, each selecting favorite viands for the other. There was no fear of indigestion, they told one another with smiles that stopped on a sudden as the corners of their mouths drew down. Viands the most delicate, wines the most precious were theirs for an hour. Their appetite, they jested warmly, was that of condemned criminals, notoriously voracious. Such tonic as they gained from the good cheer and the atmosphere about them was needed. It would not be necessary, they noted, to pay for all this, though pay they should, of course, and with their last bill. Always the clock, its face sustained by laughing cupids, ticked away the minutes, surely, inaudibly, without chance for recall. It grew near 12. Walter took out the 20-pound note remaining to them and laid it to one side, though not until their waiter, passing to the table beyond, had eyed it wistfully. It was to be his part to deny them their last little pretense to respectability and leave them with their addition unpaid. The cheap American watch bought to fill the place of those they had thrown in the sea, was it in a lifetime before, lay between them. Walter's feet found Anita's under the table, and there interlocked. He took the loaded derringers from his inner pocket, cocked them under the cloth, and laid them, sheltered from observing eyes, at his right hand. It was on the stroke of midnight, the threshold of the new year. His left hand sought hers and clasped upon it, the pressure being as convulsively returned. Curiously, with a minute between them and death, with all their souls crying out for a closer embrace, convention was too strong. The changing current of the dynamos dimmed the lights from white to dimly glowing red, and set the arm lamps to sputtering. They all winked at once and went out. "Now!" cried Anita. His right hand, the derringer in its grasp, met hers, and as she bent forward she guided it to the lovely space between her closed eyes. A tremendous report rang through the hall, followed almost instantly by another even more rending, the pistols flashing through the momentary darkness. The lights came up. Horror of horrors. 2. "What are you doing tonight, DeMar?" "Nothing in particular, Billy. It's New Year's Eve, of course, and I should like to be somewhere where I can forget. A year's a long time in passing, but short to look back to." "Of course, old chap," said Billy Van Slyke, "and I have just the thing for you. Remember the Hotel de la Pole horror?" "Certainly, Van. It came too close to the other for me to forget it. I reached London that very day." "I beg your pardon, DeMar. Perhaps I'd better say nothing more." "Go on, do. What was your plan?" "You're just back again, so you don't know what's been going on. A month ago, Madame Scarlatti, the clairvoyant, you know, announced that we were to have a repetition of that night a year ago in the weather, and that the ghosts of these two headless people are going to walk at the Hotel de la Pole at midnight tonight. The newspapers have taken it up to pass off a sort of winter big gooseberry season, and the town is talking of nothing else. It's a new thing, a new kind of excitement, and every table is engaged. I heard about it as soon as I got here, and engaged a table for 2. Harry Leland has been called home, and I was afraid I should have to go it alone until you turned up. Come along, that's a good fellow." "The ghosts will walk, will they? I've never seen a ghost, Billy Van, though I have been feeling as if I had. It will be something to think about, to talk about. What time?" "If we get there at 10:30, it will be time enough to enjoy a leisurely meal and be ready to have the spook served for dessert. I'll pick you up here as I drive by, eh?" "Good old fellow. I'll be waiting for you. It's going to be an awful night out. Madam What's-Her-Name is a good-weather prophet." "Isn't she, though? It gets worse every minute. So long." And Billy Van Slyke went lightly out into the gusty street, waving a jovial hand to his friend as he stepped into his cab. George DeMar had been traveling about Europe for a year. His physician had given him the excuse, but his object was, in part, forgetfulness, in part the attempt to solve a problem his instinct rather than his reason had set him. His beautiful wife, rejoicing in her youth, had bidden him good-bye a little more than a 12-month before in their stately city house, stipulating that he must not follow her to the steamer. It was reasonable enough, for he both detested scenes and knew the awkwardness of waiting until the last minute for a farewell. Her going left him lonely at heart, and love and inclination were too strong. He did not leave for his office, but waited at home until he could count on 5 minutes at the pier. Anita was leaving him, with his consent and approval, of course, yet greatly against his concealed inclination. He was a man of the world, and he believed that a young wife is safest with an old husband when he keeps her within call, if not within sight. One last glimpse of her he could get, at least, and he trusted that the thought of his waving to her as the great ship went out would persist and form a tender and abiding memory. Near the first gangway, his eyes steadily searching through the crowds for Anita's face, lighted upon the figure of her maid. The instant Minnie caught his eye, she ran down to him. "Oh, Mr. DeMar, my lady has not come," she cried. "Nonsense, Minnie," he replied. "She left the house more than an hour ago. She was going to her friends, and then directly here." "Yes, Mr. DeMar, but I have looked all over the boat, and I can't find a trace of her. None of the other ladies have seen her either." "Where's Mr. Scarsdale?" "I don't know, sir. I haven't seen him. I looked for him the first thing when I couldn't find Mrs. DeMar." "They have probably wandered down to look at some of the machinery, Minnie. Mr. Scarsdale is very fond of engines, and he would enjoy seeing them start. You look for them in the engine room." The girl did not move, however, until the last warning was given, when she impulsively held out her hand to her master before she reluctantly went aboard. He remained as reluctantly ashore, and he was always glad afterward that he had taken Minnie's hand. It was well that the ending of so much of his happy life should have been marked by a token of interest and affection, however slight. Of course Anita was on the ship, his reason told him, lying down perhaps in one of the several cabins secured for her party, if he had not already guessed rightly in saying that she was in the engine room with Walter. But he disliked puzzles, even when they were not particularly intricate. DeMar drove from the pier to his office, and there, had he been a suspicious man, he would have found another puzzle awaiting him. The bookkeeper bade him good morning, and ventured the remark that he would be lonely without Mr. Scarsdale. "Did you see him at the boat, sir? He was in here about an hour ago." "What brought him back?" asked DeMar quickly. "I don't know, sir. He went to the vault a minute, shook hands with me, and bolted out. He had plenty of time, too." DeMar went to the vault and found the cash-box stripped of its contents. "Oh," he said to himself, "the silly boy was afraid he hadn't money enough." He looked for some acknowledgment of the amount, and, failing to find any memorandum, told the bookkeeper to charge the cash then on hand to Mr. Scarsdale's personal account. There was no puzzle about that, surely. Walter was very boyish about some things. When, an hour later, the city thrilled and shuddered at the calamity that befell the Graustark, George DeMar's instinct again caught at the chance that Anita had missed the boat after all. He was only less shocked by the loss of Walter Scarsdale, for he loved the boy like a son, as he had loved his father like a brother. It was this sentiment in the back of his mind that Anita might have escaped that had sent him to London, to Paris, to Vienna, and Berlin, traveling the year through over Europe in the hopeless and irrational hope that she might some day, somewhere, appear to him. Of the actualities in the case he had no least suspicion. Was she not his wife? Was not Walter his son in everything but blood? So passed the first weary 12 months of his widowerhood. The rest of it, stretching on to an end, was to be more weary, more dismal, absolutely devoid of hope. During his wanderings, the thought came to him, too, that his conscience was not clear in the matter. Every day he felt her taking off to be a judgment upon him for binding her in a loveless marriage. He knew, what man does not, that he had not made her completely happy, that he had not implanted in her heart a tithe of the affection he had so earnestly striven to sow there. Toward the end, and it was poor consolation, she had seemed more buoyant, less given to the attacks of depression that had kept her secluded in her room from time to time. Could his very love have driven her to the fatal ship? Had she been glad to leave him? These unanswered queries gave added poignancy to his grief. All in good time, though unusually late for an engineer who was the soul of punctuality, Billy Van Slyke came bustling up from his cab, the wind howling through the door as he entered. He stopped to rub his hands over the bright fire on the hearth. "Madame Scarlatti is certainly a wonder," he exclaimed. "The evening papers are full of it. If she was right about the weather, the ghosts are surely going to walk. There'll be a crowd at the De La Pole." The older man had himself carefully wrapped against the inclement night, told his servant to wait up for him, congratulated Billy on getting a coupe that pretended to be heated, and they soon exchanged the worst weather of even a London winter for the warmth and hospitable brightness of the great dining room of the Hotel de la Pole. They made their way through a dissatisfied throng of well-dressed men and women, and were only to gain progress by answering the repeated questions of the attendants along the corridor with the assurance that the seats had been reserved for them. Evidently the comments of the press had overcome the difficulties of the night. "The English always were a hardy race," was Billy's comment. When they were safely seated at last, and had shivered away the last chill of the storm without, both of them noted with amusement that the hardiness of the English race did not extend to ghosts in prospect as fully as to weather in being. There was an anxiety in the room, and a glancing over the shoulder as if something might creep up behind. In the occasional lulls in the quiet conversation and the business of the waiters, the storm could be heard bellowing overhead. They smiled at first themselves, but were still not entirely proof against the general feeling of apprehension in the room. "That's the table yonder," said Billy, indicating where Walter Scarsdale and Anita DeMar had seated themselves a year before almost to the minute. Tonight it was the only vacancy in the room. She was sitting bolt upright, what was left of her, held in place by their clenched hands. He was down on the table. They'll be headless ghosts, DeMar. "Don't, Billy," DeMar shuddered. "And there wasn't a clue?" "Not a thing, not a recognizable thing. The coroner surgeon said that both had dyed their hair, and very lately, but he wouldn't venture to tell what the original color had been, except that it was lighter." "What color was it dyed?" "Great Scott!" There was a bustle throughout the room. "Do you see those people? There! They're going to sit down at the table!" A man and a woman were being escorted to the fatal spot, and the room grew deathly quiet. Every head turned to watch. "Of course I see them. I'd be the only one in the room that doesn't." "Well, they answered the printed description exactly. He's tall, smooth-shaven, and with dark brown hair. She's plump and with red bronze hair. That's just the picture of the mysterious couple in the papers tonight." Is it possible? Damar's interest, like the others, had a loathly fascination in it. He went back to the conversation before the interruption. What was done with their clothing, with the pistols? "Whose?" asked Billy abstractly, his eyes glued to the newly arrived couple. "Oh, yes, the police have everything, with photographs of the bodies and a description of the little moles and blemishes everybody has somewhere. But there was nothing and nobody to tell who they were and why they were in London. The cabman that drove them here picked them up at King's Cross. There, all knowledge of them ended. It's getting chilly in here, don't you think so?" Billy shivered. "Who has the hardihood to sit at the very table where it happened?" asked Damar, at once revolted and attracted as he gazed at the newcomers. Billy called the head waiter as soon as his attention could be diverted from the queries being fired at him on every side. "It's Sir John and Lady Memory, sir," the functionary replied to a repetition of the question. "He's a brave man, sir. Victoria Cross, sir, and they say he has a great wager laid on it." He went to convey his information to the next table. "Oh," said the Americans with instant comprehension, and fell to their food, though both felt their appetites less keen than the dinner warranted. As it came on toward midnight, it was increasingly evident that a sense of ghastliness of it all, the unnerving incongruity of outward gaiety and feasting as if to celebrate a deed that had shocked civilization, had worked its way into the being of every guest at the tables, Van Slyke and Damar not excepted. The hotel management, palpably pleased that what had promised to be avoidance of the place on such an anniversary had turned out the direct and prosperous reverse, was eagerly striving to do its best. Extra waiters hovered about, ready to be of service at the slightest hint. Many of them were busied with bottles of wine, with decanters and siphons, for there was an abnormal amount of heavy drinking, another sign of widespread apprehension. From this the waiters themselves suffered, and many of them, as the evening drew toward its close, exhibited symptoms of drunkenness. A little before 12 o'clock, one of these befuddled attendants dropped an armful of dishes in the upper end of the hall. The crash was followed by screams from several of the women, and then by a depressing silence, momentary but none the less noticeable. It was broken by hysterical laughing and crying that set everyone on edge, and a charmingly dressed woman was led from the room by her mortified escort, her feelings quite beyond her control. Now, as the year was rushing on to its doom, there was a consultation of timepieces on every hand, and a reaching nervously forward for glasses of wine or whiskey and water every moment. The Americans drank more than they had intended to, and were sitting taciturn and foreboding. "They never found the man who had been waiting on them, did they, Van?" said Damar to make himself talk. "No," replied Billy, rousing himself to the question with evident effort. "He was last seen running through the pantry. He never came back." "And they left nothing to pay for their supper?" "Not a sou marquis," said Billy. "There wasn't anything of value on either of them, not a coin or a scrap of paper." "Poor devils." They fell silent again, their gaze restlessly straying about the room, always returning to the table where Sir John and Lady Memory were sitting. As it came closer to 12, the whole company hushed. A woman, flushed with wine, laughed aloud, and was frowned into immediate quietude from every side. The nerves of a roomful were stretched almost to breaking point. The clock, its laughing cupids still in mockery about it, came to midnight. Nothing happened. Those who had been holding their watches open in their hands gave a sigh of relief as they returned them to their pockets. The New Year, temporarily forgotten, would have been toasted in another minute. A few had already taken their glasses in their hands. The storm could be heard howling overhead. Then the lights, responsive to the changing dynamos at that hour, began to go down, down, until they showed again a dim and ominous red, and the sharp crackling of the arc lights sent a shiver through the room. The shrieking wind was all that could be heard, the waiters as they bent forward to their tasks stiffening as they stooped. Every eye sought the fatal table through the gathering dusk, where Sir John, smiling now, sat fingering a visiting card. Without further warning, the lights flashed into undue and blinding brilliancy, and as suddenly expired. The wind rose to a howl, and a cold blast swept through the half-light. At that instant there were two sharp reports in succession, ringing through the hall. Scream upon scream arose from the women, those horrifying, shrilling screams that bespeak mortal agony. The deep groan of a man's voice could be heard. The room was still lighted by the candelabra on each table, and it could be seen that all about the hall men were trying to soothe their frightened companions. "Someone is hurt!" exclaimed Van Slyke. "See, right back of you there! A man is covered with blood!" As DeMar turned, his veins running cold, there was a crash and roar overhead, and a gust of freshing air swept down upon the tables, extinguishing the last glimmer of light. A patter of flying feet was heard, and instant panic would have piled up the roomful of people at the doorway had not Van Slyke, his engineering experience giving him presence of mind, put his hands to his mouth and let out a stentorian shout that demanded attention. "Sit down, you damned fools!" he yelled. "Are Englishmen afraid of spooks? Sit down, I say! You'll kill your women!" From the front of the hotel, from the pantry, came men with white faces running with lights. They were hardly needed, for the electric lights returned to duty, and the room grew red and then brilliantly white once more. The company was on its feet, every head turned and neck craned to see the fatal table. It was vacant. With a cry, a woman fainted, one of Sir John's many friends in the place. No one could have seated himself again. Tremblingly, they filed through the corridor. A silent, sober, and frightened crowd. For once the Hotel de la Pole had seen the pretended human anxiety to see ghosts walk, fully appeased. The next morning, Billy Van Slyke rushed in upon George DeMar. Early as it was, and after such a night, he was up and dressed. "Happy New Year to you," said the irrepressible engineer. "Have you seen the papers?" "No," said the older man. "Happy New Year. Is there anything new?" "They're poking a good deal of fun at us," Billy replied. "Of course, the tricks the lights played on us were due to the storm hitting the wires somewhere, and the 2 reports were from the arc globes cracked by the cold wind. 1 or 2 were cut a little by the falling pieces. The cold blast was from a skylight that blew out. That's all simple enough, and Sir John apologizes through the newspapers for his abrupt retirement, but his lady fainted, and he felt he had to carry her out at once. He has paid for it, of course, loses his wager. It was for £1,000, but that isn't all." "It rather spoils the ghost story, though, doesn't it?" suggested DeMar. "No, it doesn't," contradicted Van Slyke abruptly. "It doesn't. Sir John inadvertently left a card on the table, and it was Walter Scarsdale's." "Walter Scarsdale's? Why, you know he went down on the Graustark a year ago," said DeMar, incredulous and amazed. "That's just it. Let's go and see him about it. He'll be home on New Year's Day." The 2 men took Billy's cab for Sir John's townhouse, the paper giving them the address. They were shown into his study by the footman, and Sir John, dignified but with an eager interrogatory in his manner, came in immediately. The 2 visitors introduced themselves, apologized, and stated their errand. "I expected you," said the baronet in reply. "Madame Scarlatti told me 2 Americans would call today." Somewhat dismayed, but impelled by his natural energy to act as spokesman, Billy went on. "We were warm friends of Scarsdale's," he explained. "I was his chum in college, and Mr. DeMar here was a friend of his father's as well. You know he went down on the Graustark a little more than a year ago." "Then it was not he who gave me that card," replied Sir John, "for it was handed me in London a year ago yesterday morning by a man about my height, with a sandy beard and slightly darker hair." "That's the man," said Van Slyke. DeMar's face was grey. "Then he did not go down on the Graustark, Van," he said. "Most surprising, gentlemen," commented Sir John. "We seem to be beginning another mystery, do we not?" But the Americans were too full of their own thoughts. They thanked Sir John, declined the proffered refreshments, and went out into the street. "DeMar, I think I ought to tell you now that Leland told me Fanny saw Anita's ghost the same morning that Sir John met Scarsdale's." "Billy," said George DeMar, "I feel completely done up." "All right, old chap," responded Van sympathetically, "but I'm going to have a look at the photographs of those bodies." DeMar's eyes caught and held his countryman's. "Don't go, Billy. Don't go. I thought of it, but I'm not going." There was a flash of comprehension, and the younger man's hand went out. "I won't," he said, "if you won't, DeMar. I loved Walter." "I won't, Billy," George DeMar said with a sigh. "I loved his father." End section 20.
Section 21 of the Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by JillianPack. The Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1, Section 21. Soldiers and Sailors, Personal Relief Section. What we think. A high official recently delivered a speech at the forum luncheon of the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. He said in part that the soldiers today are not staying unemployed as a body. Figures are hard to get, but I am convinced that the large majority of the soldiers who are discharged find jobs quickly and go to them promptly. It is a minority of the men who don't seem to be able to place themselves. We disagree with this official, for it is our experience, through intimate contact with returning soldiers and sailors, that the average man finds it hard to get a job, and it is the exceptional man who secures a position. The opinion of the country seems to concur with the gentleman above, and we are grandiosely patting ourselves on the back, meeting our soldiers with bands and speeches and parades and sandwiches and smiles. But in the meanwhile, our heroes who went across the water return and literally walk the streets endeavoring to find honest work. It is a condition that may lead to serious labor troubles in the United States. The regrettable part of it is that such a state of affairs is absolutely unnecessary. If it had not been for a few of the very wealthy people of the country, even the department devoted to employment under the government would have had to close. Congress adjourned and took no steps to pay its just debts to the soldiers, beyond a paltry $60 allotted to each man discharged. Not enough money to get a complete outfit of clothes. How can we expect a man who has given up everything that he had in order to go over there to look with an optimistic eye on such a condition? His state of mind and body is something that deserves the instant and intimate attention of every patriotic citizen. We receive letters from all over the country, wherein this is shown almost without exception. Men are stranded. Their families and friends are forced to support them during the emergency. They cannot purchase new clothes. It is not dignified after a time to take a position in some very small capacity in the uniform of our country. It is not pleasant to have to go from office to office, factory to factory, etc., always meeting the same answer. Leave your name and address, and we will give you something if it turns up. We feel that the gentleman who goes to meet our returning soldiers is worthy of commendation. He is a charming individual. He extends the glad hand, waves a banner, and cheers lustily. But does this affable gentleman do anything else? Does he go out and get these men positions? Does he keep them from having to worry as to what they are going to do when they return to civilian life? In other words, does he do anything practical? Does he come home with the bacon? That is the question we ask him. We do not wish to seem pessimistic. It is not our nature. We are always inclined to find a smile where a frown ought to be, but we don't believe in shutting our eyes to the plain truth. Soldiers are people, not uniforms. They like cheers and handshaking, but what they like best is work, where they can be assured of a fairly decent living, and to be able to hold their heads up among their fellows. In this connection, we would like to call our readers' attention to the following editorial that appeared in one of the New York papers recently. Protecting the Soldier. We don't enjoy taking advice. Lots of us don't. And to be pointed to an example we might follow, but won't, is even more annoying. Australia has just done something that will appeal. Learn from Melbourne that Minister of Defence Wise announces that under the Defence Act, employers refusing to reinstate returned soldiers are liable of a fine of $2,500. The minister added that the court could order the fine paid to an employee not reinstated. Only thing we can criticize about this is that it doesn't appear to be mandatory. When soldiers are needed to march away to a war, they are promised everything imaginable. But when danger is supposed to be past and the boys come home, it's a different story. An interesting matter. When you find what your ideas are, go to them and do your best to obtain them. This was the message delivered by Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., recently to the several thousand soldiers, sailors, and Marines at the regular Sunday afternoon entertainment for men in service at the Manhattan Opera House. "The war is over," he said, "and let me advise every one of you men not to let the hero business get stale and threadbare before you get something to do. I saw a motto the other day on a Fifth Avenue sign, that they shall not have died in vain, which I think should be taken to heart by all men who have been in the service and by their friends and relatives and the friends and relatives of those who suffered on the battlefields over there to make the world better. I feel sure that you men want to put manliness and honor into the world instead of seeing what you can get out of it without any effort on your part. The armies are being disbanded, and it is up to the real American to get into the game and take an active part in the affairs of everyday life. Let the Democrats take an active interest in democratic ideals and politics, and let the Republicans take an interest in their ideals and politics." Lieutenant Colonel Roosevelt has also announced plans for an association of officers and enlisted men who served in the war. The purpose of such an association will be to keep alive the spirit of the American soldiers, and every man who served during the war will be taken into partnership. The editor would like to hear from the readers of the thrill book concerning such an association. Brief letters will be printed. The Case of Hickey. On November 8, 1917, James Hickey, 20 years old, a waif, knowing neither father nor mother nor birthplace, but being a citizen of the United States, entered the United States Army. If the world owed this pathetic figure any kindness, friendship, or sympathy, that debt has never been recognized. He got more than his share of the kicks and cuffs that frequently come to the homeless orphan from every side, and in this case, the worst of it seemed to have come from the officers of the army which he joined. His military record is evidence of his hopeless lot, no part of which was worse than that spent in the so-called military service of his country. His military history begins with his blank allotment card, stating that he had no kith or kindred. It ends with the record of his trial by court-martial. This record reveals the tragedy of the existence of this human waif, and induces one to wonder why life ever should have been given to a human soul, only to be left undeveloped, bruised, and starved. The story is told in General Court-Martial Record, number 126401, and runs like this. James Hickey, drafted November 8, 1917, had been but a few weeks in the service when he committed the unpardonable military crime of absence without leave for 2 hours at Fort Omaha, Nebraska. As a result of that initial offense, he was imprisoned in the guardhouse, where he remained for 13 months. Knowing nothing of the length of his sentence or the cause for it, having been told by an officer in authority that he would probably remain imprisoned for 10 years more, and having been advised by another officer that he had better get out the first opportunity, he broke out of prison and got away on last Christmas night. Apprehended on January 9th, this 20-year-old boy, with the mind of a child, was then promptly tried for desertion, to which he pleaded guilty. The prosecution called 2 witnesses to prove the case, and these in essential details corroborated the story the accused soldier told on oath. The 7-page, loosely written record of the trial of this boy, defended by a frightened chaplain, concludes with the testimony of the boy himself, which reveals a figure so pathetic and sad as to cause the soul of men, excepting military men, to cry out in anguish for him who from his birth had had no chance in life, had never known an act of kindness or heard a word of sympathy, and who had never known the protection of a father or the loving care of a mother, who indeed had never known his parents' names. Thereupon, the court went into secret session and sentenced this boy, who had had no chance whatever in life, either in or out of the army, to be dishonorably discharged from the service, to forfeit all pay and allowances due, or to become due, and to be confined at hard labor at such place as the reviewing authority may direct for 18 months. The sentence was approved, and was doubtless regarded in military circles as very lenient. The trial consumed 40 minutes. The findings vindicated the law and established discipline in the army. And this trial took place, and the boy was convinced, notwithstanding the fact that a board of medical officers 4 months before had pronounced that this boy had only the mind of a child of 7 years, rather than that of a man responsible for his misconduct. Real stuff. The following standing orders of the 27th Division, called Stick-to-Death Orders, should be read by everyone. They are an example of the spirit displayed by our men over there all through the war. Number 1. This position will be held, and the section will remain here until relieved. Number 2. The enemy cannot be allowed to interfere with this program. Number 3. If the gun team cannot remain here alive, it will remain here dead, but, in any case, it will remain here. Number 4. Should any man, through shell shock or other cause, attempt to surrender, he will remain here, dead. Number 5. Should the gun be put out of action, the team will use rifles, revolvers, Mills grenades, and other novelties. Number 6. Finally, the position, as stated, will be held. Read this carefully. To the editor or business manager. The great difficulty encountered by the government in re-educating disabled soldiers and sailors is to get information of the opportunity to them. There is an astonishing number of these men out in civil life, badly handicapped by their injuries, but endeavoring, nevertheless, to work. It is most amazing the ignorance of the average man and woman about what the government stands ready to do and is doing for these men. This board is endeavoring to spread this information as widely as possible in the hope of alleviating the miserable condition of some of these disabled soldiers, and I am asking you if you will not print the enclosed, or as much as you can find space for, in any way which seems to you likely to attract attention. It is a little piece of patriotic service whose object is most laudable. I know that you have been deluged with a great deal of propaganda matter from Washington, but happily to this charge we can plead not guilty, as this is the first request we have made of you, and we do it not on behalf of ourselves, but of these disabled soldiers who have reached their present desperate condition defending you and your business. I greatly hope that you will assist us to the extent of helping give circulation to this information. Very sincerely yours, Charles H. Winslow, Chief, Division of Research. Every disabled soldier and sailor should know that the government is resolved to do its best to restore him to health, strength, and self-supporting activity. That until the discharge from hospital care, the medical and surgical treatment necessary to restore him to health and strength is under the jurisdiction of the military or naval authorities. That the vocational training, which may be afterwards necessary to restore his self-supporting activity, is under the jurisdiction of the Federal Board for Vocational Education. That if he needs an artificial limb or other orthopedic or mechanical appliance, the Bureau of War Risk Insurance supplies it free upon his discharge and renews it when considered necessary. That if, after his discharge, he again needs medical treatment on account of his disability, the Bureau of War Risk Insurance supplies it free. That any man whose disability entitles him to compensation under the War Risk Insurance Act may be provided by the Federal Board with a course of vocational training for a new occupation. That the government strongly recommends each man who needs it to undertake vocational training and put himself under the care of the Federal Board, but the decision to do so is optional with each man. That if his disability does prevent him from returning to employment without training, and he elects to follow a course of vocational training provided by the federal board, the course will be furnished free of cost, and he will also be paid as long as the training lasts a monthly compensation equal to the sum to which he is entitled under the War Risk Insurance Act, or a sum equal to the pay of his last month of active service, whichever is the greater. But in no case will a single man or a man required by his course of instruction to live apart from his dependents receive less than $65 per month, exclusive of the sum paid dependents. Nor will a man living with his dependents receive less than $75 per month, inclusive of sum paid to dependents. That if his disability does not prevent him from returning to employment without training, and he elects to follow a course of vocational training provided by the federal board, the course will be furnished free of cost to him, and the compensation provided by the War Risk Insurance Act will be paid to him, but no allowance will be paid to his family. That in addition to the above, the family or dependents of each disabled man will receive from the government during his period of training the same monthly allotment and allowance as that paid prior to his discharge from the Army or the Navy. That upon completion of his course of training, he will continue to receive the compensation prescribed by the War Risk Insurance Act, so long as his disability continues. That in nearly every case, by following the advice and suggestions of the federal board, he can either get rid of the handicap caused by his disability or acquire new powers to replace any that may have been lost. That if he is willing to learn and to take advantage of the opportunities to increase his skill offered him by the federal board, he can usually get a better position than he had before entering the service. That if he fails to take advantage of these opportunities, he will find himself badly handicapped when he is obliged to compete with the able-bodied men who come back to work after the war. That the federal board, through its vocational experts, will study his particular disability and advise as to the proper course to pursue and give him free training for the occupation best suited to him. That on the satisfactory completion of his training, the federal board, through its employment service, will assist him to secure a position. That public authorities and other large employers will, in many cases at least, give the disabled soldiers and sailors preference when filling vacant positions, provided they possess the training necessary to fill them. All disabled soldiers, whether in or out of the hospital, should address their communications either to the Federal Board for Vocational Education, Washington, D.C., or to the district office of the Federal Board of the district in which he is located. The district offices of the board are located at the following points, respectively. District Number 1, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Office, Room 433, Tremont Building, Boston, Massachusetts. District Number 2, Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. Office, Room 711, 280 Broadway, New York. District Number 3, Pennsylvania and Delaware. Office, 1000 Penn Square Building, Philadelphia, PA. District Number 4, District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. Office, 606 F Street, Northwest, Washington, D.C. District Number 5, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee. Office, Room 1404, Candler Building, Atlanta, Georgia. District Number 6, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Office, 822 Madison Blanche Annex, New Orleans, Louisiana. District Number 7, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. Office, 906 Mercantile Library Building, Cincinnati, Ohio. District Number 8, Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Office, 1600 The Westminster, 110 South Dearborn Street, Chicago, Illinois. District Number 9, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. Office, 517 Chemical Building, St. Louis, Missouri. District Number 10, Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Office, Room 742, Metropolitan Bank Building, Minneapolis, Minnesota. District Number 11, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. Office, 909 17th Street, Denver, Colorado. District Number 12, California, Nevada, and Arizona. Office, 997 Monadnock Building, San Francisco, California. District Number 13, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. Office, Room 539 Central Building, Seattle, Washington. District Number 14, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Office, 810 Western Indemnity Building, 1000 Main Street, Dallas, Texas. Questions and answers. Question. Information on the following subject would be appreciated. How is present government insurance transferred to old line insurance? How much of the time the insurance is carried at present rates will apply on an endowment policy? Any information as to where one can get dope on this subject will be appreciated. Like your book, but hope you get some real thrill stories like Wolf of the Steppes. BDB. Answer. Your best policy is to write directly to the Bureau of War Risk Insurance, Information Section, Washington, D.C., for complete information, as your question covers a fairly broad field. We are glad that you like the thrill book and hope that you will become a regular reader. Question. Saw your first book through a friend of mine and am asking for some advice. I was discharged about a month ago after returning home from a year's service overseas. My old position in New York was filled, so it was me for a new job. I finally landed one down here at my trade, a machinist. Now my wife says she won't come down to a hick village like this to live, and if I don't get a job in or near New York, she's through with me. I know this isn't exactly in your line, but sometimes it helps to get another person's view. What I want to do is to get a job up north, but if I can't, how can I get my wife to look at it the right way? I spent most of my time on the other side, looking forward to getting back to home and my wife. I'm rather up a tree, and would appreciate any advice you could give me. Will watch your magazine for an answer. J.B.H., ex-sergeant of infantry. Answer. There is only one answer. If your wife is not willing to stand by you when you need her help, this is a sure sign that she cares very little for you. My advice is to stick to your position, make good, and if by that time she still remains away, you can be confident that she does not want to do her part. I would suggest, in the meanwhile, that you write her at length and lay the case before her fairly and squarely. Give her a chance. Often these things are straightened out amicably for both sides by a little intelligent consideration. Many questions are asked about wound stripes. Here are some leading ones. If a man is wounded twice by separate bullets at the same time, does he get one stripe or two? What about the man hit in many places by fragments of the same shell? If he is hit once, then starts back and is hit again, is it one wound or two? If a leg and arm are shot off simultaneously, what about it? These questions were taken to the War Department at Washington to a clerk there who specializes in wound stripes. The clerk looked over the list. That is all covered, he said, in General Order 53, and pointed to the following. A gold chevron of pattern identical with that of the War Service chevron, to be worn on the lower half of the right sleeve of all uniform coats, except fatigue coats, by each officer field clerk, and enlisted man who has received, or who may hereafter receive, a wound in action with the enemy, or as the result of an act of the enemy, which necessitates treatment by a medical officer, and an additional chevron for each additional wound, but not more than one chevron will be worn for 2 or more wounds received at the same time. Disablement by gas necessitating treatment by a medical officer shall be considered to be a wound within the meaning of this order. All those questions have come up, said the clerk, and the answer is as the order shows that no matter how many wounds are received at the same time, the man gets only 1 chevron. If a soldier were wounded and started back and was wounded later, he would be entitled to 2 wound chevrons. The many questions that have arisen have required official interpretation of other parts of the order. For example, the medical officer must be an officer of the Army to keep the records clear, and this issue was settled by the claims of soldiers of a merchant ship that they were wounded in a submarine attack. There was no Army medical officer on board. Their wounds were not serious enough to require attention after the ship reached port, so that no connection was established with the medical department of the Army. Their claims had to be denied. The wound chevron is naturally the most prized in the Army. There are soldiers in the United States Army who were wounded during the Spanish-American War. They began to put in applications soon after the order was issued on the ground of a wound received more than 20 years ago. It was ruled that the order was retroactive, and the veterans of the Spanish-American War received the coveted chevrons. Then the question came up as to the Civil War, and this, of course, was decided affirmatively by the ruling on the later war. Those affected are retired Army officers. They may wear wound chevrons for the Civil War wounds on some occasions, limited in number. Some are seen on the streets now with wound chevrons and other chevrons sewed on civilian clothing. This is against the regulations and is covered in the following memorandum from the Adjutant General P.C. Harris. These chevrons, meaning all, are for the wear on the Army uniform only and should not be worn on civilian clothing. Neither gold, blue, nor silver chevrons will be issued to men after their discharge from the Army, but the War Department has no objections to honorably discharged officers or enlisted men who rendered the necessary service, purchasing service chevrons from private firms, provided they wear them only on their uniform, when that uniform may be worn, and provided also that they make application to the Adjutant General of the Army, stating service rendered, so that the same may be verified, and to the right of the applicant to wear the chevrons verified. No steps have been taken against those who have chevrons on civilian clothes, the practice thus far simply being discouraged. But there is authority, and if the custom spreads, this authority may be invoked. The Editor. End of section 21.
Section 22 of the Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. The Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1. Cross Trails by Ronald Oliphant. The enlarging of the Thrill Book comes on the date that opens a new era in the United States. We might call the next period the Sahara period, and if ever people needed thrills, they will need them now. The Thrill Book will have to take the place of the mythical cocktail and the forgotten glass of foaming beer. It comes to you with the inauguration of an experiment in America, which all of us will watch with extreme interest. The subject of prohibition has long been discussed. Now it is upon us with full force. Whether it will prove a success or a failure remains to be seen. Human nature is naturally optimistic, we think, and it reacts swiftly to the many influences with which it comes in contact. The American spirit is fine, even awe-inspiring, equal to any emergency. It has consented to this in its open-hearted way. Let us hope that the latest change in the Constitution is one that will be of value. At any rate, we will have the sly feeling that the Thrill Book will become more necessary than ever. We have been told that it was a kind of oasis in the desert of modern magazines. Now is its chance. Attaboy. Among those present, as they say in the paper, in this issue is Todd Robbins, a writer who possesses the rare faculty of making fantasy and imagination real and vital. Oscar Wilde remarked in one of his inimitable essays that art itself is really a form of exaggeration, and selection, which is the very spirit of art, is nothing more than an intensified mode of overemphasis. We agree with this, and we think that, as an artist of prose, Todd Robbins is without an equal among the younger school of writers. Read The Bibulous Baby, and if you don't think that it is the most astounding and clever bit of fiction that you have ever run across, we lose our one best bet so far. We are frank enough to admit that the bizarre, the fantastic, the unusual, the adventurous appeal to us strongly. It was this that caused us to open fire with the thrill book. Carrying the thought a bit further, we might add that such stories as The Bibulous Baby are hard to find. Even for a magazine that has already published extraordinary and out-of-the-rut fiction, this little tale stands out sharply. It is a gem of its kind. It contains that ironic humor that has made H.C. Bunner dear to all our hearts, that flavor that runs through Eugene Field, Mark Twain, and the best of O. Henry. In this connection, we confess that we consider the above-named writers purely American in their refreshing geniality and lack of imitation. What cheers us considerably is the fact that Todd Robbins is a hard worker. He takes his pen seriously. He doesn't waste his time doing space fillers or following the trend of many fictioneers who have made the thrill book popular by its very contrast to their humdrum material. We are lucky enough to have a few more of these short bits by Robbins, and also a few months hence we will start a serial by him that certainly has no parallel today. With this issue of the thrill book, we lay before you the work of some of the best writers of fiction. The name of H. Bedford-Jones carries with it a large following of devoted readers, and it makes us feel especially happy to announce the fact that we have secured what is without a doubt the best serial he has ever written, The Opium Ship, beginning in this number. One becomes breathless following the adventures of Sir Gerald Desmond, gentleman and soldier of fortune. It isn't so much that he is continually running into danger, but what holds us is the way he gets out of it. We can recommend the coming installments to you with a safe conscience. During the entire history of the thrill book, we do not recall ever having run across a cleaner, more straightforward and adventurous tale than this. It comes right up to the standard which we intend to follow now and always. We can promise you more stories by H. Bedford-Jones. Write to us and tell us what you think of this serial. Among our discoveries in fiction, we rate Clarence L. Andrews very highly. His first story came to us January 14th, and we made him an offer almost at once. It was called Profit by Loss and appeared in our April 15th issue. Our readers have written to us telling us how much they like it. To them, the novelette, Vanishing Gold, in this number will come as a welcome surprise. Here is a writer with a golden future. He knows how to tell a story, and he has the patience of a genius. All the work that comes from his pen is of the highest craftsmanship, possessing human interest, and always one finds a corking plot that holds one fascinated from the first line to the last. The success of an author like Andrews is one of the pleasures that come to an editor after he has tackled huge piles of ominous-looking manuscripts, without losing hope that among them somewhere is the kind of material he knows will win favor. We have other stories by Andrews, and we warn you that if you miss any of them, you will regret it. Among the stories in this issue that have appealed to us strongly, we mention The Conqueror by Robert W. Snedden, a well-known and brilliant writer. The 10th Crisis by L.J. Beeston, an English author whose knowledge of the short story is only exceeded by his understanding of human nature. And last of all, J.U. Geisy's The Seventh Glass, a bit of fiction that contains a very unique situation and a whirlwind surprise at the end. From our readers. Here is a letter that conveys sincerity in every line. Dear Editor, have just finished reading your thrill book of this date, and to express my honest opinion of it, I would say it is great. I like the stories The Jeweled Ibis and The Shadows of Race, and would like to see more like them. They were simply wonderful. I also liked A Hooting Tooting Son of a Gun. I am from the West and like to read Western stories. Wishing you good luck and waiting anxiously for the next thrill book. I am yours very truly, C.C. Wade. We are always glad to hear from men in the service or out of it. Here is a real letter. Dear Sir, congratulations. You certainly filled a long-felt want when you brought the thrill book before the public. I found the first 2 numbers on a stand here in Camp Taylor this morning, and instinctively, scenting something novel, I purchased them. Besides being curious as to their contents, I had noted the Street and Smith imprint, and that was sufficient guarantee that this new magazine was up to the mark. Carefully, I perused the editorials on the back covers. Then, on getting to barracks, I went at the stories themselves to see if they were what the editor claimed them. Well, not only did they justify all his claims, they surprised me as well, for they turned out to be even better than I'd expected. For unusual stories, they've pretty nearly everything beat, and having read magazines for many years, I stand in a position to know. The first I tackled was Wolf of the Steppes. It looked odd, but the first paragraphs caught my interest, and the subsequent events described held me until the last line. It's as weird as any I've read so far. Ivory Hunters is unusual, but up to Carey's standard. I know that author's work. In this latest, he nearly outdid himself. J.C. Kofoed handled splendidly his characters in The Jeweled Ibis. Here we've a tale of unsurpassed mystery as well as adventure. Give your readers more of this type. You'll find they enjoy them immensely. In The Shadows of Race by J.H. Bishop, you've given another highly entertaining yarn. So far I've read both parts and have had my appetite whetted for the rest of it. I suppose it will run to 4 or 5 parts. A hooting-tooting son of a gun is good, put across more of Smiley's stuff. This story is a hummer. The Web of Death and The Man Who Met Himself are both fine, and so there you have a brief review about all of them, and can see they've pleased me. As soon as I'm discharged, which I expect will be within a week from today, I'll show the first 2 numbers to my friends and relatives, and I know of at least a dozen subscriptions you will receive as a result. I am enclosing the addresses of several of my comrades who were at my side at the front in France. I'd suggest your sending them each a sample copy of the thrill book. I'm a willing and ready to help friend. Sincerely yours, Private William Rand Loescher, 335th Field Artillery Casuals, Camp Zachary Taylor, Louisville, Kentucky. End of section 22.
Section 23 of The Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Adam Milligan. The Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1. Around the World. Around the World. Yank's return is like Enoch Arden's. Wearing 2 gold service stripes on his uniform, a large, middle-aged man walked into the San Angelo, Texas post office a short time ago and point-blank asked the janitor if Williamson was his name. "It is," replied John M. Williamson, 53 years old and stooped with the cares of a large family. "What's yours?" "Dooley is my name," was the quiet reply. Thus met 2 men who, the returned soldier charges, are married to the same woman. Williamson says his wife was deserted at Cleburne more than 10 years ago and had a divorce. She was washing clothes to support herself and 3 small children when he became the head of the family in 1914. Dooley tells a thrilling tale. He and his wife, who had been married once before and had a son, and their 3 children lived in Cleburne in 1909. Hoping to obtain work in the railroad shops at Temple, Dooley went there. He says he met a stranger who told of riches that awaited in Mexico and agreed to accompany his newfound friend. The farewell note he wrote to his wife was the last Mrs. Dooley ever heard from her husband until he appeared here recently. Hardly had he left the Rio Grande behind when he was arrested, for what, Dooley says, he does not know. His captors were Mexicans, a band of rough men. He was confined in an underground dungeon, and there for 7 years his life wasted away. He was given wholesome food 3 times a day, but the only light of ray that he knew filtered through bars that were far beyond his reach, and Dooley obtained his only exercise by tramping his cell. His beard grew down to his waist, and his clothes rotted in the foul atmosphere and fell from his body. Freedom finally came by means of a dumbwaiter, on which food each day was lowered to the prisoner. One day meals were not forthcoming, and Dooley jerked down the rickety platform and pulled himself to the top. The entrance to what then appeared to be an old mine was unguarded, and Dooley started on foot across the barren country. He was picked up by federal cavalrymen who escorted him to the border. Having no passport, Dooley swam the river and reached El Paso. Search for his wife proved unavailing, and the blacksmith, then 42 years of age, joined the army. He went to France, fought gallantly in many battles, and returned to the States in January. The following month he was discharged at San Antonio. Through an uncle in Oklahoma, he learned that a stepson was at Lampasas. The young man directed him to San Angelo, telling Dooley that his mother had married a man named Williamson. It was in this way that Dooley located his family. Ima, his oldest girl, was only 5 years old when her father left. She greeted him a young woman of 15. Maggie, who had been only 7 months old, appeared a girl of 11. Ura, the middle sister, is 13. But Dooley found his wife hardened against him on account of what she believes was desertion on his part. Then, too, he beheld 2 children, Woodrow May, a girl named for President Wilson, and John J. Pershing Williamson, a baby boy aged 3 months, who were born after Mrs. Dooley's marriage to the post office janitor, and Dooley gave up all hopes of ever being reunited with the woman. But the man who for years was a prisoner of Mexican bandits, and who later strafed the Huns in France, wants his 3 children, whom he intends to educate. He has obtained these while Mrs. Williamson has gone to Belton to live with a sister. She took with her Woodrow May and Johnny Pershing, but Williamson went after them. What the solution of the problem in the Eternal Triangle will be is unknown. Toss of coin settles fate of vessel. Toss of a coin settled the fate of the old 3-masted steamer Arcata, which for years had laid on the mudflats of Alameda, California. Dave Crowley is the new owner of the Arcata, and as 2 attempts to make her seaworthy have failed, he will tear her to pieces and salvage the machinery, winches, rudder, and other parts which are in good condition. Crowley expects to realize $4,000 on the old hulk. How Crowley acquired the Arcata is the subject of much gossip on the floor of the Marine Department of the Chamber of Commerce. It appears that during a discussion with James Smith, the Arcata's former owner, as to what he intended to do with the ancient vessel, Crowley offered to toss a coin for the ship. "All right," said Smith, "I'll toss with you to see whether you give me $1,500 or I give you the Arcata." "Done," promptly answered Crowley. Tom Crowley, his brother, flipped a coin, and Smith shouted, "Heads!" As it came down, it was found that tails won. Smith grinned and shook hands with Crowley, and the bargain was sealed. The old Arcata figured in the shipping of the Pacific coast for many years in the old days. Dog saves master from bull. Joe Orberg of Manor, Texas, night watchman and official dog catcher, had a narrow escape from losing his life a short time ago after roping a big bull, as first proceeding to landing the vicious animal in the town's cattle pound. Orberg, who weighs 250 pounds, had started leading the bull toward the pen when the beast suddenly gave a loud snort, accompanied by a wild leap that sent the marshal sprawling upon the ground. Luckily, Orberg had his dog Brownie with him, and the dog saved his life. When the bull observed the marshal lying on the ground, which it did before Orberg could regain his feet, it immediately charged and was about to gore the fallen man with its horns, when the dog made a long leap and caught the bull by the nose, and with a quick side movement threw the animal upon its side. Getting a good hold on the bull's throat, the dog would have killed it had not Orberg interfered and wrenched Brownie away from the bellowing beast. After this, the bull was very docile, and kept its eyes constantly upon the dog as it was led to the pound. Orberg is now prouder than ever of Brownie, and says he wouldn't take $1,000 for him. Baby eats 4 pounds of buckshot. Mrs. Bertha Noding of Ennis, Texas, is no physician or surgeon. In fact, she is so tender-hearted that she could not attend the bedside of any person who might have been operated on. She hasn't the slightest knowledge of surgery, even in the most elementary stage, but this week she performed an operation, a major operation, which caused the leading surgeons of the city to sit up and listen. More than that, she performed the operation on her 2-year-old daughter, Martha Marie. It was a matter of life or death with Martha Marie, and Mrs. Noding could not secure the services of a surgeon promptly. Hence she took the matter in hand herself. While Mrs. Noding was attending to the household duties, little Martha Marie got possession of a 4-pound sack of buckshot bullets, about the size of a candy lemon drop. She liked the looks of the blue candy, and began swallowing them right off. Before Mrs. Noding knew what had happened, little Martha Marie had devoured the 4 pounds of shot. She did not appear troubled, but when Mrs. Noding picked her up to rock her to sleep, she noticed the child's weight had increased perceptibly. Pretty soon Martha Marie had a pain, several of them, in her tummy. She began to cry and then told her mother about swallowing all the blue candy in the bag. She showed her mother the empty bag and rubbed her stomach. Right then Mrs. Noding decided something must be done, and done at once. She phoned several physicians, but they were busy with flu patients and couldn't come. Mrs. Noding then hit upon a plan. She would operate on the little girl herself, and she did. Did Mrs. Noding slice her little daughter open with a cruel knife and take the bullets out? Oh no. She just took little Martha Marie by the heels and gave her a few shakes, good hard shakes, and the buckshot came rolling out on the floor. She repeated the operation and finally shook all the shot out of the baby. Physicians declare they had never thought of performing such an operation, but that it was simple and effective enough. Incidentally, it saved the mother a fee of 50 bones. Martha Marie went right on and took her nap. She never felt the slightest effects of the operation. Wolf killed in city. Hiram Lawrence killed a wolf near his home within the city limits of Grand Rapids, Wisconsin. The animal had been seen several times but was thought to be a dog. More wolves are reported in the neighborhood, and an organized hunt may be held. Speedy justice. 3 hours after he had held up the cashier of a grocery in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and robbed him of $1,000, Frank Moran, a flashily dressed young man from Connecticut, was on his way to the penitentiary under a 10-year sentence. Moran commandeered a motor truck to escape, but was captured after a chase lasting half an hour. Build public works. Public works of all kinds that will give employment to men demobilized from the Army and from the war industries should be put underway at once as a reconstruction measure, according to Secretary of Labor William B. Wilson, who, in a statement outlining his views on the subject, points out that not only will the transition from wartime conditions to a peace basis be facilitated thereby, but that a work of great permanent value to the nation will be accomplished. States, cities, towns, in fact all governmental divisions, ought now, he believes, to make up for the reduced construction due to the war. The government's obligation to provide employment for the returning soldiers and the necessity for many forms of improvement in municipal and state equipment render such a program essential at this time, he holds. The Secretary's statement follows. I am of the opinion that from the time we restore ourselves to our normal post-war activities, the demand for peacetime production will be so great that there will not be the remotest possibility of securing any reduction in the wage rates from their present basis. I feel further that the manufacturer who fails to take into consideration the prospects of the future, and who, in a hope of securing a cheaper labor or cheaper raw material, does not build up his organization and maintain it during the possibly brief period of readjustment, will be handicapped in securing his share of the business afterward, because he will be handicapped through lack of working forces in his factory. It therefore seems to me that the situation resolves itself into taking care of the possible problem in the interim between our ceasing war activities and the time when we have assumed our natural post-war activities. He got baby's picture. Although he had never seen his baby, born after his departure for France, Lieutenant Ralph S. Bush of Junction City, Kansas, received a picture of the little one just before he was killed in action, according to a letter to Mrs. Bush from a brother officer, Lieutenant James C. Bowden. Ralph had just received the photos of the baby, and he showed them to all of us, writes Lieutenant Bowden. At noon, on August 9th, on a long march toward Fismas, we received orders to move over across the railroad and river and attack the woods that run parallel with another railroad north of it, but west of Fismas. When all were across, the Germans threw an artillery barrage on us and around us. We kept moving to make less casualties. We had a few, and Lieutenant Bush was among them. He was hit with a piece of shrapnel and killed instantly. He was ahead of his men, leading them on and through. The great possibilities in tungsten. Australia is second in importance among British territories producing tungsten ores. In Queensland, many of the principal mines have quite recently been acquired by one of the largest of the concerns which have established tungsten reduction plants in Great Britain since the war, and the event appears to promise a new era of progress for this branch of mining in Queensland. Wolfram is mined in New South Wales and Victoria, while important quantities of scheelite, another ore of tungsten, are obtained in New Zealand and in Tasmania. Wolfram is also obtained as a byproduct of the Cornish tin industry and has received special attention during the last 4 years. Canada has become a producer chiefly of scheelite, mined in Halifax County, Nova Scotia, and deposits are also known in Rhodesia. It is difficult to foresee the future of tungsten, but it is worthwhile to examine the considerations which would lead one to form an opinion. It would be optimistic to expect a continuance of the eager demand and handsome prices realized at times during the last 4 years. If a general commercial depression and a fall in the world's demand for steel were to take place, tungsten would suffer, as would many other commodities. On the other hand, activity in the world steel trade should support the position of tungsten. Its popularity among steelmakers as a steel hardener would seem to be established for the present. The possibility may also be borne in mind that the results of scientific research, which has been continuously conducted during the war, may lead to new uses for the metal. Tungsten proved to be a dominating factor in military power as soon as it was recognized that modern war must be waged with shells by the million and with guns by thousands. Its individual power in times of peace may prove equally great. War machine-making tools for education. Machines that until a few months ago were busily engaged in grinding out weapons of destruction soon are to be used to foster the genius of potential young American inventors. Practically all of the government's war machine-making tools, nearly $100 million worth of which now are in storage at Washington, will be turned over to the nation's vocational training schools if Congress acts favorably on a bill now pending before it. Under the provisions of this measure, which was introduced into the lower house of Congress by Representative Caldwell of New York, it is proposed to permit universities, colleges, and other institutions now using antiquated or worn-out equipment to select the newest machines from the stocks now idle at Washington. The material will be loaned to the educational institutions officially, but unofficially it is agreed that they will not be withdrawn from their new peacetime uses unless an unexpected demand should be made upon the nation's arsenals and munition factories. In a letter to a Washington official familiar with the new project, Dr. David Snedden, president of the National Society of Vocational Education, gave his unqualified approval to the plan, but asked for more information as to the provisions for distributing the machinery. He said that while none of the colleges and universities that had given of their time and equipment for the training of soldiers during the war expected to have such equipment replaced, it would be a welcome assistance from the government. One of the greatest benefits of the new plan, it was explained by vocational school teachers who are supporting it, is that it would permit the entire nation to reap big profits from the use of these machines. End section 23.
Section 24 of the Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. The Thrill Book, Volume 2, Number 1. The Thrill Book, our July 15th number. By Ronald Oliphant. Murray Leinster has exceeded his usual mastery of fiction in a novelette we are going to give you in our next number. It is called 1,000 Degrees Below Zero. Imagine an enemy of the human race, a great scientist who understands all natural laws and who shrewdly conceives a plan by which he can tie up the traffic of every harbor in the world, closes the Panama Canal, destroys his enemies one by one, terrorizing the entire civilized world, and defeats all attempts to destroy him. We can easily say that it is the best thing of its kind that has come to our hands. Not only does the author understand the telling of a fascinating story, but he has made a lifelong study of science. Suppose you were walking along the wharf, and suddenly you saw a monster iceberg floating down the Hudson River, a column of hot steam arising from the center, and as it moved along, causing complete destruction of everything in its way. What would you do? In this amazing novelette, Murray Leinster has created the best example of pseudo-scientific fiction that has yet appeared in the Thrill Book. This is the kind of story that you can't find in any other magazine now published in America. What appealed to us was the absorbing interest that holds the reader from the first line to the last. Here is an author whom it will pay you to watch. Confidentially, we may as well admit that we are going to follow this novelette up in a few issues with another story dealing with an entirely different situation, but with the same astounding and fantastic background. We advise you to order the next issue of the Thrill Book from your news dealer at once. Be sure and begin the new serial in this issue by H. Bedford-Jones. The Opium Ship is a swiftly moving, dramatic yarn. This author is likewise a new acquisition on the staff of the Thrill Book. His work has been appearing regularly in another large periodical, but following our usual policy of not allowing anything to stand in the way of our getting the best on the market, no matter what it costs, or the amount of time it takes, we went out after H. Bedford-Jones, made him an offer that he couldn't refuse. The result, a crackerjack serial, and later on a novelette that should make the tired reader sit up and grip his chair. May Freud Dickinson, a writer at present living in India, has sent us a bit of fiction called The Mate, which is particularly interesting to those who care for stories dealing with the mysterious and never-to-be-explained East. It has a surprise at the end, utterly unlike any other thing of its kind. Don Mark Lemon and Clyde Broadwell both have examples of their work in the July 15th issue. The former calls his striking story The Whispering from the Ground. The latter contributes the first of a series called Tales of the Double Man. Back to Earth by R.R. Baker and Room 13 by Will S. Gidley are stories by unknown writers. It is the policy of the Thrill Book to stand behind any out-of-the-rut story that comes along, no matter who writes it or where it is written. The Poniard of Charlotte Corday by François de Valiant contains a unique situation. In the July 15th issue, the serial by John R. Coriel comes to an end. Strasbourg Rose has earned a great deal of praise. If you haven't started it, do so now. We will be glad to send you the 2 back numbers if you desire them. Upon receipt of 20 cents in stamps, we will mail the June 1st and 15th numbers so that you can enjoy reading this refreshing tale from the very beginning. If you get the thrill book twice a month at your news dealer, we are content. But if you don't, we advise you to subscribe at once, so you will not miss the type of fiction that you will be unable to read anywhere else. The subscription rate is $3.60 per year in the United States, $4.32 in Canada, $5.04 foreign. Let us hear from you right away. End of section 24, and end of the Thrill Book Volume 2, Number 1.